The human mind, in its intricate dance between perception and reality, often presents us with a curious paradox. The less we truly comprehend about a subject, the more unshakable our conviction in our own assertions can become. This phenomenon plays out daily across countless stages. Observe any online forum where anonymous voices declare definitive truths with startling certainty. Listen to a heated family debate where deeply held beliefs trump factual counterarguments, or witness the grand stages of public discourse where charismatic figures speak with unwavering conviction on subjects about which their knowledge is demonstrably superficial. The frustration we often feel encountering such individuals stems from this core disconnect, a profound lack of expertise coexisting with an almost defiant abundance of self-assurance. This state, which we term confident ignorance, is not merely a social inconvenience. It is a profound psychological pattern woven into human cognition, carrying deep spiritual implications. It represents the comfortable dwelling within a self-constructed narrative, a mental fortress where existing beliefs are perpetually reinforced, leaving the vastness of what remains unknown and unexplored conveniently outside its walls. This essay embarks on an integrated exploration of confident ignorance, examining it not merely as a cognitive error, but as a fundamental human condition that impedes both psychological growth and spiritual awakening. We will first delve into the scientific mechanisms underpinning this certainty in the face of limited knowledge, dissecting the cognitive biases, mental shortcuts, and neurological pathways that foster it. Simultaneously, we will turn to the rich tapestry of wisdom traditions, which having delineated the pervasive presence and profound implications of confident ignorance, we now turn our gaze inward, seeking to unravel the intricate scientific mechanisms that construct and sustain this peculiar state of unwavering conviction in the face of superficial understanding. Our exploration commences not with a moral judgment, but with a dispassionate examination of the very architecture of human cognition. For confident ignorance, we contend, is not merely a character flaw, but a deeply ingrained phenomenon, a systemic byproduct of our mental machinery. We propose that a confluence of cognitive biases, indispensable mental shortcuts, and specific neurological pathways conspires to forge the robust veils of certainty that obscure genuine comprehension. At the forefront of these cognitive architects stands a pantheon of biases, each contributing its unique brick to the edifice of confident ignorance. Perhaps the most foundational of these is confirmation bias, the insidious tendency to seek, interpret, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. We are not objective observers of reality. Rather, we are skilled curators of data, subconsciously filtering out disconfirming evidence while amplifying anything that validates our current perspective. Consider the anonymous voices that populate online forums, each asserting their quote one with unshakable resolve. They are not genuinely engaging with counter-arguments. They are sifting through the vast digital ocean for any crumb of information, however tenuous, that reinforces their initial stance, thereby solidifying their conviction and deepening their confident ignorance. A fleeting anecdote or an unverified statistic, if it aligns with their internal narrative, becomes irrefutable proof, while mountains of contradictory data are dismissed as irrelevant or erroneous. This selective perception creates an echo chamber within the mind, where one's beliefs are perpetually affirmed, fostering an illusion of comprehensive understanding. Intimately related, and perhaps the most vivid illustration of confident ignorance, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. This cognitive bias describes the phenomenon wherein individuals with low ability in a specific task or area of knowledge tend to overestimate their own competence. Conversely, highly competent individuals often underestimate their relative expertise. The cruel irony of Dunning-Kruger is that the very lack of knowledge or skill prevents one from accurately assessing one's own deficiencies. The less one knows, the less one knows that one knows little. This psychological blind spot is a cornerstone of confident ignorance. We observe it in the self-proclaimed experts who confidently lecture on complex geopolitical issues after reading a single headline, or the amateur diagnosticians who vehemently dispute medical professionals based on a cursory internet search. Their confidence is not derived from mastery, but from an inability to recognize the vastness of what they do not know. The initial shallow dip into a subject creates a misleading peak of perceived understanding, leading the individual to believe they have grasped the entirety of the landscape, when in reality they have barely scratched the surface. This false summit of knowledge becomes a launching pad for assured declarations, often delivered with an authority that belies their true grasp of the subject. Further buttressing this architecture are biases such as the availability heuristic. And when? Anchoring bias. The availability heuristic dictates that we tend to overestimate the likelihood or importance of events or information that come to mind easily. If a particular narrative, however sensational or anecdotal, is readily recalled, it can disproportionately influence our judgments and foster an unwarranted sense of certainty about a complex issue. Consider the individual who confidently dismisses the efficacy of a medical treatment based on a single, vivid story of a negative outcome, ignoring robust statistical evidence to the contrary. The easily accessible, emotionally charged anecdote takes precedence over abstract data, leading to a confident yet ill-informed conclusion. Anchoring bias, meanwhile, demonstrates how an initial piece of information, or quote 2, can disproportionately influence subsequent judgments, even if that anchor is arbitrary or irrelevant. Once an initial assertion or belief takes root, it can anchor our subsequent reasoning, pulling our interpretations and conclusions towards it, making it difficult to deviate even in the face of new, contradictory information. This initial anchor, often formed from incomplete or biased information, can solidify into a confident stance that resists revision. Beyond these, overconfidence bias serves as a meta-bias, a general tendency to overestimate one's own capabilities, knowledge, or accuracy. This pervasive human trait is the fuel that powers confident ignorance. We are, by nature, optimistic about our cognitive prowess, often believing ourselves to be more rational, more knowledgeable, and less susceptible to biases than the average person. This inherent overestimation of our own intellectual faculties creates fertile ground for confident ignorance to flourish, as it diminishes the likelihood of critical self-assessment and the humility required for genuine learning. These cognitive biases, while seemingly flaws, are often the unintended byproducts of our reliance on mental shortcuts or heuristics. In a world inundated with information and demanding constant decision-making, Our brains cannot afford to engage in exhaustive, deliberative analysis for every single piece of data or every judgment. Heuristics are adaptive mechanisms, cognitive rules of thumb that allow for rapid, efficient processing and decision-making. They enable us to navigate complex environments without being paralyzed by infinite possibilities. However, the very efficiency that makes them invaluable also renders them prone to systematic errors, particularly when applied outside their domain of utility or without critical reflection. When we encounter novel or complex information, our brains often default to these shortcuts. Instead of engaging in the arduous task of deep inquiry, critical evaluation, and nuanced understanding, we quickly categorize, generalize, and infer based on readily available cues. This rapid processing can generate a feeling of knowing or understanding that is superficial but deeply compelling. The immediate coherence provided by a heuristic-driven conclusion often feels correct, bypassing the need for further investigation. This allows for the rapid formation of confident opinions on a myriad of subjects, from economic policy to scientific theories, without the laborious effort of genuine expertise. The sensation of certainty, therefore, often precedes and even substitutes for actual knowledge, creating the quintessential state of confident ignorance. We feel we understand, and that feeling is mistaken for understanding itself. The bedrock upon which these cognitive mechanisms operate is the intricate landscape of our neurological pathways. Modern neuroscience offers compelling insights into how the brain contributes to the comfort of certainty and the resistance to intellectual discomfort. The feeling of being right, of having a coherent and stable worldview, is not merely a neutral cognitive state. It is often a neurologically rewarding one. When our beliefs are affirmed, or when we successfully resolve cognitive dissonance by settling on a confident conclusion, our brains can release neurotransmitters like dopamine associated with pleasure and reward. This creates a powerful positive feedback loop. The brain is rewarded for maintaining a consistent narrative, even if that narrative is built on shaky intellectual foundations. This neurological reinforcement can make challenging one's own confidently held beliefs feel akin to withdrawing from a reward, generating a resistance that is not purely intellectual, but also deeply physiological. Furthermore, the brain prioritizes coherence and stability. Faced with ambiguity or complex contradictory information, the brain actively seeks to reduce uncertainty. This drive for cognitive closure can lead it to prematurely settle on a confident explanation, even if it is simplistic or incomplete. The effort required for sustained critical thinking, for holding multiple conflicting ideas in mind without immediately resolving them, is significant and primarily resides in the prefrontal cortex. However, the brain, like any complex system, is remarkably efficient and often defaults to lower energy modes of operation. When the prefrontal cortex is not fully engaged in demanding analytical tasks, it becomes easier for biases and heuristics to take over, allowing for the formation of confident yet uninformed opinions that satisfy the brain's innate desire for order and certainty. The comfort of certainty, therefore, is not merely a metaphor. It is a palpable neurological state that the brain actively seeks to achieve and maintain, even at the cost of genuine understanding. In essence, these cognitive biases, mental shortcuts, and underlying neurological mechanisms do not represent isolated glitches in the human mind. Rather, They form a synergistic system that, while often adaptive for survival and rapid decision-making, simultaneously renders us exquisitely vulnerable to the phenomenon of confident ignorance. This is not a flaw confined to a few misguided individuals, but a systemic feature of human cognition, a deeply embedded pattern that influences us all to varying degrees. Understanding these foundational scientific underpinnings is the first crucial step in acknowledging the profound challenge that confident ignorance poses. For if we are to pierce these self-imposed veils of certainty, we must first recognize the sophisticated internal architecture that constructs them. The path forward, therefore, demands not just intellectual rigor, but also a profound awareness of our own cognitive limitations and the subtle ways our brains can conspire to keep us confidently yet unknowingly in the dark. Having dissected the intricate self-reinforcing architecture of confident ignorance, revealing its foundations in cognitive biases, mental shortcuts, and neurological reward systems, we now pivot from understanding how it is built to confronting what it builds. The previous exploration unveiled a sophisticated internal edifice, a fortress of certainty constructed from the very materials of perception and thought. The challenge before us is not merely to acknowledge its existence, but to comprehend its pervasive resonance, its profound implications for individual psychological growth, and the collective intellectual landscape. This is where the theoretical framework begins to ripple outwards, touching the tangible contours of human experience and interaction. We observe, with a detached yet concerned gaze, how this internal architecture manifests in the external world. Confident ignorance, once conceptualized as an individual cognitive phenomenon, proves to be a powerful societal force. It shapes public discourse, fueling the unyielding certainty of anonymous voices on digital platforms and the unwavering declarations of charismatic figures in the public square. It is the bedrock upon which echo chambers are constructed, where confirmation bias finds fertile ground and the Dunning-Kruger effect amplifies the most ill-informed pronouncements. In these environments, the comfort of certainty becomes a shared delusion, a collective insistence on simplified narratives that resist the nuanced complexities of reality. We see it in the swift dismissal of expert consensus, in the unshakable faith in anecdotal evidence over statistical rigor, and in the profound polarization that often characterizes contemporary dialogue. The brain's innate preference for cognitive closure, when amplified by social reinforcement, transforms intellectual inquiry into ideological battlegrounds, where being right eclipses the pursuit of truth. The insidious nature of this phenomenon lies in its comfort. To inhabit the space of confident ignorance is to reside in a state of psychological ease, free from the unsettling tremors of doubt or the arduous labor of critical inquiry. The neurological rewards for being right, the dopamine release associated with affirming one's beliefs, creates a powerful incentive to remain within this self-constructed narrative. This comfort, however, comes at a profound cost. It arrests psychological and spiritual growth, calcifying perspectives and preventing the expansion of one's mental horizons. True growth, we contend, necessitates a willingness to engage with discomfort, to confront the limits of one's understanding, and to tolerate the often unsettling ambiguity that accompanies genuine inquiry. The path beyond confident ignorance is, by its very nature, a path away from this seductive ease and towards a more demanding, yet ultimately more rewarding, engagement with reality. The resistance to challenging this deeply entrenched state is formidable. It is not merely a matter of intellectual laziness. Rather, it is intimately intertwined with the very fabric of our identity and ego. Our beliefs, particularly those held with confident ignorance, often become foundational pillars of our self-concept. To question these beliefs is, in a very real sense, to question ourselves, to destabilize the narrative of who we are. This psychological vulnerability triggers a defensive response, often manifesting as increased dogmatism or outright hostility towards dissenting viewpoints. The brain, ever vigilant in protecting its coherent self-narrative, perceives challenges to confidently held beliefs as threats, activating regions associated with physical pain and aversion. Furthermore, our social identities are frequently built upon shared certainties. To deviate from the group's established truths can lead to social ostracization, a primal fear that often overrides the rational pursuit of knowledge. The fear of being wrong, the fear of admitting ignorance, thus becomes a powerful barrier, cementing the walls of our intellectual fortresses. Yet, within this seemingly impregnable architecture, a subtle crack can form. This initial fissure often begins not with a grand revelation, but with a quiet, persistent tremor of cognitive dissonance, a faint echo that suggests something is amiss, a subtle incongruity that the mind, initially, attempts to suppress. It might be a fleeting moment of self-doubt, a disquieting observation that doesn't quite fit the established narrative, or the lingering unease after dismissing a counter-argument too readily. This discomfort, initially perceived as an unwelcome intruder, is, in fact, the nascent seed of awareness. It is the mind's unconscious signal that the existing framework is incomplete, perhaps even flawed. To progress, we must learn to recognize and, crucially, to embrace this discomfort, viewing it not as a threat to our certainty, but as an invitation to deeper inquiry. This is the first, most crucial step in dismantling the comfortable illusion. The antidote to confident ignorance we propose lies in the cultivation of what we term epistemic humility. This is not a surrender to relativism or an embrace of intellectual apathy, but rather a profound and active recognition of the limits of one's own knowledge. It is the understanding that our perspective is inherently partial, our understanding always incomplete, and our certainty often an illusion. Epistemic humility demands an ongoing, rigorous self-assessment of what we truly know versus what we merely believe or assume. It requires us to shed the egoic attachment to quote 11 and to prioritize the pursuit of genuine understanding, even when that understanding reveals the vastness of our own ignorance. This stance transforms the act of learning from a process of accumulating facts into a journey of continuous re-evaluation and revision. It is a mindset that actively seeks out disconfirming evidence, not to defend existing beliefs, but to refine them. Embarking on this path forward necessitates a conscious and sustained effort, a deliberate rewiring of our cognitive habits. We must first cultivate active self-reflection, a disciplined practice of examining our own beliefs, biases, and the sources of our convictions. This involves asking ourselves with genuine curiosity and without judgment, why do I believe this? What evidence supports it? What counter-arguments have I considered, and how thoroughly? What would it take for me to change my mind? This metacognitive engagement, this thinking about our thinking, is vital for identifying the hidden assumptions and unexamined premises that underpin confident ignorance. Furthermore, we must learn to embrace cognitive dissonance as a catalyst for growth. Instead of shying away from information that contradicts our views, we must actively seek it out, perceiving the resulting mental friction not as an attack, but as an invaluable opportunity. It is in the space of dissonance that new insights are forged, and more robust understandings are constructed. This requires a profound shift in perspective, moving from a defensive posture to one of open curiosity. The cultivation of a moule à côté 12 becomes equally paramount. This Zen concept, applied to epistemology, advocates for approaching every new piece of information, every new perspective, with the openness and eagerness of a novice, devoid of preconceptions and prejudgments. It means temporarily suspending our existing frameworks to truly absorb and evaluate new data, rather than immediately filtering it through the lens of our established certainties. This intellectual posture allows for genuine learning, rather than merely confirming what we already quote 13. Finally, we must reevaluate our relationship with doubt. In the realm of confident ignorance, doubt is perceived as a weakness, a flaw to be overcome by stronger conviction. However, on the path of epistemic humility, doubt is transformed into an intellectual strength. It is the engine of inquiry, the necessary precursor to genuine discovery. To doubt responsibly is not to descend into nihilism, but to engage in a rigorous process of questioning, testing, and verifying. It is the intellectual honesty to admit, quote, 14, quote, or quote 15, quote, knowing that such admissions are not failures, but invitations to deeper engagement and more accurate understanding. This journey, we acknowledge, is not a destination, but a continuous process of intellectual and psychological maturation. It is a commitment to lifelong learning, to perpetual re-evaluation, and to an ongoing dialogue with the complexities of existence. The rewards, however, are profound. A more accurate understanding of the world, a greater capacity for empathy and nuanced thought, and a liberation from the restrictive confines of self-imposed certainty. The path forward beyond confident ignorance, therefore, begins with this conscious decision to step out of the comforting shadows of what we think we know, and into the illuminating, albeit sometimes challenging, light of genuine inquiry. The specific strategies for navigating this challenging terrain, for actively cultivating epistemic humility and transforming our cognitive habits, will be the focus of our subsequent exploration. The quote 16 in certainty, as we posited, is not merely a momentary fissure, but an invitation to a profound reorientation of our cognitive landscape. It is the initial disruption of the self-constructed mental fortress, an opening through which the light of genuine inquiry might penetrate. Yet, recognizing this potential is only the first step. The sustained dismantling of confident ignorance requires deliberate, strategic engagement with our innate cognitive tendencies. We now turn our attention to the specific methodologies and practices that can foster the very shifts we have identified as crucial: the cultivation of epistemic humility, the conscious embrace of cognitive dissonance, the adoption of a quote 17, and the re-evaluation of doubt as a fundamental intellectual strength. These are not passive states, but active disciplines, demanding consistent effort and a willingness to confront the discomfort inherent in true learning. Our journey begins with epistemic humility, which we defined not as a lack of conviction, but as an active, informed recognition of the limits of one's knowledge. It is the intellectual posture that acknowledges the vastness of the unknown and the inherent fallibility of human understanding. To cultivate this, we must first engage in rigorous, active self-reflection and metacognition. This practice involves turning the lens of inquiry inward, not merely to what we believe, but to how and why we hold those beliefs. It demands a Socratic self-examination, where one rigorously questions the provenance of an idea. Was it acquired through direct experience, through reasoned deduction, or through passive absorption from a cultural or social milieu? Is its foundation sturdy, built upon verifiable evidence and logical coherence, or does it rest upon inherited assumptions, anecdotal evidence, or the comforting echo chamber of shared opinion? This process often reveals the surprising fragility of deeply held convictions, exposing the mental shortcuts and biases that have shaped our worldview. By consciously mapping the cognitive pathways that lead to our conclusions, we begin to differentiate between genuine understanding and mere familiarity, between reasoned conviction and unexamined dogma. Complementing this introspection is the practice of mapping the boundaries of knowledge. This involves a deliberate intellectual exercise of categorizing one's understanding into distinct domains: that which we demonstrably know, that which we believe we know, but upon closer inspection realize is based on inference or incomplete data, and that which we are explicitly aware we do not know. The third category, the known unknown, is particularly vital. It represents the fertile ground for genuine inquiry and intellectual growth. When we are able to articulate the precise contours of our ignorance, we transform it from a nebulous threat into a defined landscape ripe for exploration. This practice directly counters the Dunning-Kruger effect, which thrives on the unawareness of one's own incompetence. By actively identifying gaps in our knowledge, we create a structured framework for learning, replacing the vague comfort of confident ignorance with the precise directionality of informed curiosity. Finally, within the framework of epistemic humility, we must learn to acknowledge expertise. This is not an abdication of critical thought, but a recognition of the division of intellectual labor and the cumulative weight of specialized knowledge. Confident ignorance often manifests as a casual dismissal of expert consensus, privileging personal intuition or readily available information over years of dedicated study and empirical investigation. To counter this, we must cultivate an appreciation for the arduous process of acquiring deep expertise, understanding that it involves not only the accumulation of facts, but also the development of refined methodologies, critical discernment, and a nuanced understanding of a complex domain. By respecting the intellectual authority of those who have genuinely mastered a field, we temper our own overconfidence and open ourselves to learning from those whose knowledge is demonstrably more robust. This does not mean uncritical acceptance, but rather a presumption of value that warrants careful consideration before dismissal. Once the groundwork of epistemic humility is laid, we can then consciously move towards embracing cognitive dissonance. Traditionally viewed as an uncomfortable state to be resolved as quickly as possible, often by rejecting the conflicting information, we propose that dissonance should be reframed as a critical opportunity for intellectual growth. It is the friction necessary for sharpening understanding, the internal signal that our existing mental models may be incomplete or inaccurate. To leverage this, we must engage in conscious exposure to counter-arguments. This goes beyond passively encountering differing opinions. It involves actively seeking out well-reasoned, articulate perspectives that directly challenge our most cherished beliefs. The intent here is not to provoke a debate or to seek conversion, but to genuinely understand the logical framework and empirical basis of an opposing viewpoint. This requires a deliberate suspension of judgment, allowing the arguments to be absorbed and processed without the immediate defensive mechanisms that typically arise. A powerful technique in this regard is the Stillmanning technique, where straw manning involves misrepresenting an opponent's argument in its weakest form to make it easier to attack. Quote 20 demands the opposite. It requires us to articulate the strongest, most coherent and most persuasive version of an opposing viewpoint even, and especially if we profoundly disagree with it. This intellectual exercise forces a deeper engagement with the substance of the counter-argument, compelling us to move beyond superficial criticisms and grapple with its core strengths. By attempting to argue against our own position from the most formidable opposing stance, we invariably uncover weaknesses in our own understanding or identify areas where our reasoning might be incomplete. This practice transforms potential conflict into a rigorous self-evaluation, strengthening our own arguments if they withstand the challenge, or prompting necessary revisions if they do not. Crucially, in the face of dissonance, we must learn the discipline of delaying judgment. The innate human drive for cognitive closure often impels us to resolve conflicting information swiftly, typically by dismissing one side of the argument to restore mental equilibrium. However, genuine insight often emerges from allowing the tension of dissonance to persist. By resisting the immediate urge to categorize, dismiss, or affirm, we create mental space for deeper processing. This prolonged engagement allows for the integration of new information, the re-evaluation of existing frameworks, and the potential emergence of novel syntheses that transcend the initial conflict. It is in this sustained state of productive unease that the most profound cognitive shifts can occur, moving us beyond the simplistic binaries of confident ignorance towards a more nuanced and complex understanding. The third pillar in our strategic framework is the cultivation of a quote 21 or Shoshin, a concept rooted in Zen Buddhism. This approach advocates for encountering every subject, even those with which we are intimately familiar, with the openness, curiosity, and lack of preconception characteristic of a true novice. It is a deliberate shedding of the expert's assumed knowledge, which can often become a barrier to new insights. To foster this, we recommend the why cascade. This involves repeatedly asking why about fundamental assumptions, pushing beyond superficial explanations to uncover underlying principles or indeed the absence thereof. For example, when confronted with a commonly accepted societal truth, one might ask, "Why is this true?" and then, "Why is that true?" to the answer, and so on, until the foundational premises are exposed. This persistent questioning can reveal how many of our beliefs rest upon layers of unexamined assertions rather than robust, independently verified evidence. Furthermore, we must practice deconstructing familiar concepts. Many ideas we use daily have become so ingrained that their internal logic, historical context, or even their precise meaning is rarely scrutinized. The beginner's mind encourages us to take these concepts, break them down into their constituent parts, and examine each piece as if encountering it for the very first time. What are the unspoken assumptions embedded within this concept? What are its historical contingencies? What are its true implications when applied rigorously? This analytical dissection strips away the patina of familiarity, allowing us to see the concept afresh, identify potential flaws, or uncover overlooked dimensions. This process is particularly effective in challenging the comfortable, often simplistic narratives that confident ignorance constructs around complex issues. Finally, to truly embody the beginner's mind, we can benefit from learning outside one's domain. Deliberately engaging with an entirely new field of knowledge, be it quantum physics for a humanities scholar or classical philosophy for a scientist, forces us to confront true novice learning. In such unfamiliar territory, our existing expertise offers little comfort, and we are compelled to approach the subject with genuine humility and a fresh perspective. This experience of grappling with fundamental concepts, of asking seemingly naive questions, and of building understanding from the ground up, can then be consciously applied back to our familiar domains. It reminds us that even in areas where we consider ourselves proficient, there is always more to learn, and that our existing frameworks are often just one way of organizing reality, not the only way. The culmination of these strategies leads us to the critical re-evaluation of doubt as an intellectual strength. In the realm of confident ignorance, doubt is perceived as weakness, as uncertainty, as a failure to commit. We argue, however, that rigorous doubt is the engine of intellectual progress, the necessary precursor to genuine understanding and innovation. To reframe doubt, we advocate for adopting the quote role. This entails consciously taking a critical stance toward one's own most cherished beliefs, actively seeking out potential flaws, inconsistencies, or alternative interpretations. This is not about self-sabotage, but about subjecting one's convictions to the most stringent possible test, ensuring their resilience and identifying areas where they might need refinement or qualification. This internal dialogue transforms doubt from a paralyzing force into a productive analytical tool. Alongside this, we must cultivate probabilistic thinking. Confident ignorance often operates in a binary world of, quote, 27, quote, or quote 28, quote 29, quote, or quote 30, quote. This rigid framework leaves little room for nuance or the complexities of reality. Probabilistic thinking encourages us to move away from such absolute judgments and instead assign degrees of likelihood to our beliefs. Few things in the empirical world are absolutely certain. Most exist on a spectrum of probability. By acknowledging this, we become more comfortable with ambiguity, more open to revising our conclusions as new evidence emerges, and less susceptible to the allure of simplistic, definitive answers. This approach fosters a dynamic, evolving understanding of the world rather than a static, dogmatic one. Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, we must learn to value the unanswered question. Confident ignorance often seeks to fill every void with a prepackaged answer, to eliminate all uncertainty. However, the presence of unresolved questions is not a deficiency in our knowledge, but rather a sign of intellectual vitality and an invitation for further exploration. It is in the space of the unknown, in the questions that defy immediate answers, that the greatest discoveries and the deepest insights often reside. By embracing these open-ended inquiries, we shift our focus from the mere accumulation of answers to the ongoing process of inquiry itself, recognizing that the journey of understanding is continuous and inherently incomplete. This reorientation transforms the discomfort of not knowing into the exhilaration of intellectual possibility. In integrating these strategies, epistemic humility, the embrace of dissonance, the beginner's mind, and the re-evaluation of doubt, we begin to systematically dismantle the foundations of confident ignorance. This is not a one-time endeavor, but an ongoing practice, a continuous commitment to intellectual rigor and self-awareness. It requires courage to confront our own cognitive limitations and a willingness to trade the comfortable certainty of superficial understanding for the dynamic, often challenging, pursuit of genuine insight. The path forward, therefore, is not about acquiring more facts, but about transforming the very way we relate to knowledge itself, paving the way for a more authentic psychological and spiritual growth. We have, thus far, delineated the intricate anatomy of confident ignorance, charting its cognitive biases, neurological reinforcements, and societal ramifications. We then proposed a counter-narrative, presenting epistemic humility not merely as an abstract virtue, but as a cultivable practice, buttressed by concrete strategies designed to dismantle the edifice of unexamined certainty. Now, we turn our attention to the practical application of these strategies, to the lived experience of transforming one's relationship with knowledge, and to the profound, often challenging impact this reorientation exerts upon both the individual psyche and the collective discourse. These are not passive mental exercises, but active, often arduous engagements with the very fabric of our cognitive and emotional landscapes. To map the boundaries of one's knowledge, as we suggested in the cultivation of epistemic humility, is an undertaking far more rigorous than a casual acknowledgement of limits. It demands a deliberate and systematic ignorance audit. We are called to articulate not only what we do not know, but more crucially, why we previously believed we possessed understanding. This involves dissecting the origins of our convictions. Were they inherited, absorbed through osmosis from an echo chamber, or genuinely forged through critical inquiry? The process frequently unearths a discomforting realization that many of our foundational truths are built upon anecdotal evidence, unverified assertions, or the sheer weight of repetition. The act of meticulously detailing the lacunae in our understanding, of charting the edges of our competence, often triggers an initial wave of cognitive dissonance, a jarring recognition of intellectual vulnerability. Yet, it is precisely this vulnerability, openly acknowledged, that forms the bedrock of authentic intellectual growth. Concomitant with this self-assessment is the imperative to acknowledge genuine expertise. This transcends a polite nod to credentials. It entails a conscious effort to identify, engage with, and learn from those who have dedicated significant intellectual labor to a domain. In an era where information is democratized but wisdom remains elusive, distinguishing genuine expertise from performative confidence becomes a critical skill. It requires us to cultivate a discerning ear, to prioritize evidence-based reasoning over charismatic delivery, and to resist the siren call of simplistic answers. The practical application involves seeking out primary sources, engaging with peer-reviewed literature, and, perhaps most challenging, submitting our nascent understandings to the scrutiny of those demonstrably more knowledgeable. This often necessitates suppressing the ego's desire to be seen as already proficient, embracing instead the role of the perpetual student. The deep impact here is a recalibration of our internal authority, shifting from a self-referential certainty to a deference to corroborated knowledge, thereby fostering a more robust and verifiable understanding of the world. The strategies for embracing cognitive dissonance move us from a state of internal reflection to active engagement with the external world of ideas. Conscious exposure to counter-arguments is not a passive reception of differing views, but a deliberate, almost strategic, immersion in perspectives that fundamentally challenge our established beliefs. This is a purposeful act of intellectual discomfort. We are not merely listening to rebut, we are listening to comprehend. This might involve actively seeking out media sources known for opposing viewpoints, participating in structured debates with a genuine intent to understand, or reading scholarly works that directly contradict our cherished notions. The practical challenge lies in overriding the brain's natural inclination towards cognitive ease and confirmation bias, which predispose us to dismiss or rationalize away information that threatens our worldview. The deeper impact is a gradual desensitization to the immediate threat posed by conflicting information, transforming dissonance from a signal of danger to a prompt for deeper investigation. Building upon this, the steel-manning technique requires us to construct the strongest, most charitable version of an argument with which we disagree. This is a profoundly empathetic and intellectually demanding exercise. It means momentarily suspending our own convictions to fully inhabit the logical framework of the opposing view, to articulate its premises with clarity and its conclusions with force, perhaps even more eloquently than its original proponents. We become, for a time, its most ardent, albeit temporary, advocate. The practical application of steelmanning is transformative. It forces us to identify the underlying assumptions and core principles of divergent perspectives, often revealing shared values or points of commonality previously obscured by surface-level disagreements. This practice not only strengthens our own arguments by exposing them to their most formidable opposition, but also fosters a profound respect for the complexity of human thought, chipping away at the simplistic binaries that fuel confident ignorance. Furthermore, the discipline of delaying judgment is a critical antidote to the reflexive certainty that characterizes confident ignorance. In an age of instant opinions and rapid-fire discourse, the ability to consciously suspend immediate categorization, evaluation, or dismissal is a radical act. This means cultivating an internal pause, a mental space where ambiguity is tolerated and conclusions are deferred until sufficient evidence and reflection have been brought to bear. Neurologically, this involves overriding the limbic system's impulse for quick categorization and engaging the prefrontal cortex for more deliberate processing. Practically, it manifests as resisting the urge to comment immediately, taking time to research before forming an opinion, or simply acknowledging that one does not yet possess enough information to render a definitive verdict. The deeper impact is a liberation from the tyranny of premature certainty, fostering a more nuanced, provisional, and ultimately more accurate understanding of complex realities. The cultivation of a beginner's mind actively dismantles the accumulated certainties that confident ignorance thrives upon. The why cascade is a potent practical tool in this regard. It involves a systematic deconstruction of familiar concepts by repeatedly asking why. This is not a superficial inquiry, but a relentless probing that peels back layers of received wisdom, inherited assumptions, and conventional explanations. If we believe a certain economic policy is beneficial, we ask why. If the answer points to increased GDP, we ask why is increased GDP beneficial? If the answer involves improved living standards, we ask, why do we define living standards in this way? This relentless questioning pushes us beyond superficial understanding to the foundational principles and often arbitrary definitions upon which our beliefs rest. The practical application reveals the often unexamined premises that underpin our worldviews, exposing their fragility and offering opportunities for reconstruction on more robust foundations. Similarly, deconstructing familiar concepts involves taking an established idea, one we assume we fully grasp, and consciously breaking it down into its constituent parts, examining each component as if encountering it for the first time. This might involve analysing the etymology of a word, tracing the historical evolution of an institution, or dissecting the philosophical underpinnings of a scientific theory. The goal is to strip away the patina of familiarity and re-engage with the raw conceptual elements. This practice disrupts cognitive ease, forcing us to confront the possibility that our understanding was merely a comfortable acceptance of convention. The deeper impact is a reawakening of intellectual curiosity, transforming routine knowledge into a fertile ground for novel insights and fresh perspectives. Moreover, learning outside one's domain serves as a powerful catalyst for cultivating a beginner's mind. By deliberately engaging with subjects entirely foreign to our established areas of expertise, we are compelled to confront our own ignorance in a non-threatening context. A physicist studying ancient philosophy, or a historian delving into quantum mechanics, is forced to adopt a posture of genuine humility, to ask fundamental questions, and to grapple with new terminologies and conceptual frameworks. This cross-disciplinary exploration not only broadens our factual knowledge but, more importantly, exposes us to different modes of inquiry, diverse epistemologies, and alternative ways of structuring thought. The practical impact is a profound challenge to the siloed thinking that often reinforces confident ignorance, fostering intellectual agility and a recognition of the interconnectedness of knowledge. Finally, re-evaluating doubt transforms it from a weakness to an intellectual virtue. Adopting a devil's advocate role extends beyond still-manning external arguments. It involves an internal, rigorous self-critique. We consciously interrogate our own hypotheses, seeking out their potential flaws, weaknesses, and unexamined assumptions. This requires intellectual courage, as it means actively undermining the very certainty that the ego often craves. Practically, it might involve journaling alternative explanations for observed phenomena, brainstorming counter-examples to our own theories, or presenting our ideas to trusted colleagues, specifically requesting them to find fault. The deeper impact is a fortification of our own arguments, not by insulating them from criticism, but by subjecting them to the most stringent internal review possible, thereby increasing their resilience and veracity. The shift to probabilistic thinking is a fundamental reorientation away from binary certainty. Instead of categorizing beliefs as definitively true or false, we learn to assign degrees of confidence, acknowledging that most knowledge exists along a spectrum of likelihood. This involves actively quantifying uncertainty, even if informally, and communicating our conclusions with appropriate caveats and qualifiers. For instance, instead of asserting X will happen, we might articulate, based on current evidence, we estimate an 80% probability of X occurring, with the understanding that new data could alter this assessment. The practical application of this approach permeates decision-making, encouraging flexibility, adaptability, and a proactive stance towards risk assessment. The deeper impact is a liberation from the rigidities of absolutist thinking, fostering a more nuanced and realistic engagement with a complex, uncertain world. Ultimately, valuing unanswered questions represents the zenith of this intellectual transformation. Confident ignorance seeks closure, definitive answers, and the comfort of settled knowledge. Epistemic humility, conversely, learns to appreciate the generative power of inquiry itself. It shifts the focus from the destination of an answer to the journey of exploration. Practically, this means cultivating a sustained curiosity that is comfortable with ambiguity, that sees unsolved problems not as failures, but as invitations for further investigation. It involves actively seeking out areas of intellectual frontier, acknowledging the limits of current human understanding, and celebrating the vast expanse of the unknown. The profound impact is a transformation of our relationship with knowledge itself. It ceases to be a fixed commodity to be acquired and defended, and instead becomes an infinite dynamic process of ongoing inquiry, a testament to the boundless potential of the human mind when unshackled from the chains of unexamined certainty. These practical applications, when embraced with diligence and courage, move us beyond mere intellectual exercises. They reshape our internal landscape, fostering a resilience that stems not from unshakable conviction, but from an adaptable engagement with reality. Individually, this cultivates authentic self-awareness, psychological agility, and a profound capacity for growth. Collectively, an aggregation of such epistemically humble minds offers a potent antidote to the polarization and stagnation that confident ignorance engenders. It lays the groundwork for more constructive dialogue, more robust problem-solving, and ultimately, a more intellectually vibrant and adaptable society. This is not a finite project, but an ongoing commitment, a continuous habit of mind that promises not just greater knowledge, but a more profound and authentic way of being in the world. The strategies for dismantling confident ignorance, as we have explored, are not merely intellectual exercises confined to the individual mind. Their profound impact extends far beyond, reshaping the very fabric of collective understanding and societal discourse. Having delineated the path to authentic self-awareness and psychological agility at the individual level, we now turn our gaze to the aggregated effect of these transformations. An intellectually vibrant society, as envisioned, is not a spontaneous occurrence, but the emergent property of countless individuals actively engaged in the relentless pursuit of epistemic humility. It is a collective consciousness cultivated through the conscious, sustained effort to audit ignorance, embrace dissonance, cultivate a beginner's mind, and re-evaluate doubt. When individuals consistently practice an ignorance audit, mapping the boundaries of their knowledge and deferring to genuine expertise, the collective intellectual landscape begins to shift. Public discourse, traditionally dominated by the loudest or most confidently ignorant voices, starts to make space for nuanced inquiry. The collective known unknowns expand, not as a sign of weakness, but as a robust framework for identifying areas ripe for genuine investigation. This collective humility fosters a more collaborative approach to problem solving, where the goal is not to assert pre-existing beliefs, but to co-construct a more accurate and comprehensive understanding. We observe a reduction in the superficiality that often characterizes public debate, replaced by a deeper engagement with the complexities of issues, facilitated by a shared recognition of the limits of any single perspective. The conscious engagement with counter-arguments, particularly through the steel-manning technique and the deliberate delaying of judgment, fundamentally alters the dynamics of group interaction. No longer are opposing viewpoints immediately dismissed or caricatured. Instead, they are granted the intellectual courtesy of being articulated in their strongest possible form. This practice, when adopted collectively, transforms potential ideological battlegrounds into arenas of sophisticated deliberation. The cognitive dissonance that might otherwise lead to entrenchment or tribalism becomes, for the group, a shared catalyst for deeper investigation. Diverse perspectives are not just tolerated but actively sought out, understood as essential components for a more complete picture. This collective embrace of dissonance allows a society to grapple with multifaceted challenges, from intricate policy decisions to complex ethical dilemmas, with greater intellectual honesty and less susceptibility to simplistic binary solutions. Furthermore, the widespread cultivation of a beginner's mind, manifested through the Weigan cascade, the deconstruction of familiar concepts and cross-disciplinary learning, injects a vital dynamism into collective thought. Societal narratives, often ossified by tradition or unquestioned assumptions, become subject to renewed scrutiny. Innovation, both technological and social, ceases to be the exclusive domain of isolated geniuses and becomes a more distributed, iterative process. When entire communities deconstruct foundational concepts, they unlock new possibilities for understanding and action. The cross-pollination of ideas across different domains, encouraged by a collective beginner's mind, leads to novel syntheses and solutions that would remain invisible within the confines of specialized, confidently ignorant silos. This continuous intellectual renewal ensures that a society remains adaptable, resilient, and capable of navigating an ever-changing world without being paralyzed by outdated dogmas. Finally, the collective re-evaluation of doubt, wherein it is transformed into an intellectual strength, fundamentally alters the epistemological foundation of a society. When individuals adopt a, quote, 48 stance, practice probabilistic thinking, and genuinely value unanswered questions, the collective shifts from demanding absolute certainty to embracing reasoned uncertainty. This is not a descent into relativism, but an ascent to a more sophisticated understanding of knowledge itself, recognizing its provisional, evolving nature. A society that values unanswered questions is a society that prioritizes ongoing inquiry over dogmatic closure. This fosters an environment where scientific exploration is not hindered by ideological pre-commitments, where policy decisions are subjected to rigorous empirical testing, and where ethical frameworks are continually refined through critical reflection. Doubt, once a source of anxiety or a perceived weakness, becomes the very engine of collective progress, propelling society forward into uncharted intellectual territories. However, the transition to such an epistemically humble society is not without its formidable challenges. Confident ignorance, deeply intertwined with identity, social cohesion within echo chambers, and neurological reward systems, offers psychological comfort and a sense of belonging that can be powerfully resistant to change. The very act of admitting, quote, 49, quote, or revising a deeply held belief can be perceived as a threat to one's social standing, intellectual competence, or even moral integrity within groups that valorize certainty. Charismatic figures, adept at leveraging the allure of simple answers and unwavering conviction, can easily exploit these vulnerabilities, reinforcing confident ignorance for personal or political gain. The fear of social ostracization, the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, and the sheer effort required for continuous self-reflection often create a powerful inertia, hindering the widespread adoption of epistemic humility. We observe a natural human tendency to seek cognitive closure, even at the expense of accuracy, making the sustained commitment to open-ended inquiry an arduous task. Moreover, the institutional structures of many societies are often inadvertently designed to reward confident assertion over nuanced understanding. Educational systems may prioritize rote memorization and the reproduction of established facts over critical inquiry and the exploration of ambiguity. Media landscapes, driven by the imperative of capturing attention, often favor sensational certainty over complex provisional truths. Political systems, too, frequently reward leaders who project an image of unwavering conviction, even when such conviction is built on a foundation of confident ignorance, making it difficult for epistemically humble voices to gain traction. The very architecture of public discourse can inadvertently reinforce the biases that fuel confident ignorance, creating echo chambers and feedback loops that make it difficult for counterarguments to penetrate. Yet, it is precisely in acknowledging these resistances that we find the impetus for deliberate systemic change. The cultivation of epistemic humility, therefore, must extend beyond individual practice to become a conscious societal project. This necessitates a re-evaluation of our educational paradigms, shifting emphasis from the transmission of facts to the development of critical thinking, metacognition, and the active mapping of knowledge boundaries from an early age. Curricula could be designed to explicitly teach cognitive biases, the nature of evidence, and the value of intellectual humility. We envision educational environments where "I don't know, but I'm willing to find out" is celebrated as a mark of intellectual strength, not weakness. Furthermore, the media, as a powerful shaper of public consciousness, bears a significant responsibility. Instead of amplifying confident ignorance through simplistic narratives and polarized debates, it could prioritize nuanced reporting, contextualization, and the representation of diverse, well-reasoned perspectives. Platforms could be designed to reward intellectual curiosity and rigorous inquiry rather than sensationalism and ideological purity. Public forums, both digital and physical, could be intentionally structured to encourage steel-manning, delayed judgment, and the collaborative exploration of complex issues, moving beyond adversarial debate towards genuine deliberation. Ultimately, a society committed to dismantling confident ignorance must also reimagine its leadership. True leadership in an epistemically humble society would not be defined by an unwavering certainty, but by the capacity to facilitate collective inquiry, to articulate the boundaries of current understanding, and to courageously lead the charge into the unknown. Such leaders would foster environments where questioning is encouraged, where mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, and where the collective pursuit of truth is prioritized over the maintenance of any single dogma. This shift would fundamentally alter the nature of governance, scientific research, and cultural evolution, moving towards systems that are more adaptive, more resilient, and more genuinely reflective of the complex realities they seek to understand and influence. The journey towards a society rooted in epistemic humility is, by its very nature, an ongoing one. It is not a destination to be reached, but a continuous process of self-correction, collective learning, and intellectual evolution. The seeds of this transformation are sown in the individual commitment to challenging one's own confident ignorance, but their full bloom requires a collective embrace of the strategies we have outlined. It demands courage, the courage to admit ignorance, to sit with discomfort, and to perpetually question what seems certain. Only then can we hope to construct a collective future that is not merely comfortable in its certainties, but vibrant in its capacity for genuine understanding and boundless inquiry. This sustained commitment to intellectual rigor and humility is the bedrock upon which a truly enlightened and adaptive society can be built, capable of navigating the profound complexities of existence with wisdom, resilience, and an ever-expanding horizon of knowledge. The systemic changes we advocate represent not merely a series of policy adjustments, but a profound cultural recalibration, a collective pivot away from the comfort of confident assertion toward the rigor and resilience of confident inquiry. We recognize that the individual transformations detailed in preceding chapters, while foundational, will inevitably encounter friction and regress if the broader societal ecosystem continues to reward the very cognitive patterns we seek to dismantle. The quote 51, as we have explored, are not solely internal constructs. They are woven into the very fabric of our institutions, our communication channels, and our collective expectations. To truly foster a society rooted in ongoing inquiry, we must meticulously re-examine and redesign the structures that shape our shared cognitive landscape. Consider first the transformative potential within our educational systems. For generations, pedagogy has often prioritized the transmission of established facts and the confident regurgitation of received wisdom. Success is frequently measured by the ability to provide definitive answers implicitly and often explicitly, discouraging the articulation of uncertainty or the sustained exploration of ignorance. We propose a paradigm shift where the educational journey is reframed not as a process of filling an empty vessel, but as the cultivation of a robust and adaptable internal compass, capable of navigating the vast, often uncharted territories of the unknown. This entails a curriculum that actively integrates epistemic humility as a core learning objective, teaching students not just what to know, but how to approach what they do not know. It means fostering environments where the, quote, 52 cascade is not merely tolerated but celebrated, where the deconstruction of concepts reveals their inherent complexities and the limits of current understanding. Pedagogical approaches would then evolve to emphasize Socratic inquiry, problem-based learning, and interdisciplinary studies that intentionally expose students to the ambiguous interfaces between distinct knowledge domains. The goal is to move beyond the siloed acquisition of information towards the development of synthetic thinking, the ability to identify patterns across disparate fields, and crucially the capacity to recognize when existing frameworks are insufficient. Assessment methodologies too must adapt. We envision a move beyond standardized tests that primarily measure recall towards evaluations that assess the sophistication of questions posed. The rigor of the investigative process, the capacity for critical self-reflection regarding one's own biases, and the willingness to revise one's understanding in light of new evidence. Imagine a system where the ability to articulate a nuanced, well-reasoned, quote, 53 is valued as highly as a correct answer. Such a shift would empower individuals to embrace intellectual discomfort as a catalyst for growth, rather than shying away from it as a mark of failure. Parallel to educational reform is the imperative to re-engineer our media landscape. In its current configuration, the media often operates under pressures that inadvertently reward confident assertion and simplistic narratives. The drive for immediacy, engagement metrics, and the amplification of polarizing voices frequently overshadows the painstaking work of nuanced inquiry. Complexity is perceived as a barrier to accessibility, and doubt as a weakness in conviction. To counteract this, we advocate for a media environment that actively prioritizes depth, context, and the rigorous exploration of multiple perspectives. This necessitates a renewed commitment to investigative reporting that delves into the underlying causes and intricate interdependencies of issues, rather than merely reporting surface-level conflicts or ideological skirmishes. It means valorizing journalistic practices that challenge both the reporters and the audience's preconceived notions, offering a panoramic view of a subject rather than a narrow predetermined aperture. Furthermore, the digital platforms that increasingly mediate our access to information bear a significant responsibility. Algorithms currently optimized for engagement often inadvertently create echo chambers and reward sensationalism, thereby reinforcing confident ignorance. A fundamental shift is required towards algorithms that prioritize accuracy, diverse viewpoints, and thoughtful deliberation. This might involve weighting content based on its evidentiary rigor, the breadth of perspectives it incorporates, or its capacity to foster constructive dialogue. Simultaneously, cultivating critical media literacy among citizens becomes paramount. This involves equipping individuals with the cognitive tools to discern confident assertion from evidence-based inquiry, to critically evaluate sources, to recognize the rhetorical strategies employed to manipulate opinion, and to become acutely aware of their own susceptibility to confirmation bias in their information consumption habits. A media ecosystem that encourages questioning, cross-referencing, and the active seeking of counterarguments would serve as a powerful societal antidote to the spread of unexamined certainties. Finally, the reimagination of political and public discourse stands as perhaps the most formidable, yet most critical undertaking. Our contemporary political arena is frequently characterized by unyielding ideological stances, performative certainty, and the often vitriolic demonization of opposing viewpoints. Compromise is often framed as capitulation, and any expression of doubt is interpreted as a lack of conviction, a sign of weakness in leadership. To transcend this unproductive deadlock, we must cultivate forums and mechanisms for deliberative democracy, where genuine inquiry and the collaborative exploration of shared problems take precedence over partisan posturing. This involves structuring public debates not as zero-sum contests, but as collective investigations into complex challenges, where diverse perspectives are genuinely heard, integrated, and allowed to shape adaptive solutions. Policy-making processes, too, must evolve to become more iterative, more adaptive, and explicitly acknowledge the inherent uncertainties within complex systems. Rather than striving for definitive, immutable solutions, we should design policies with built-in mechanisms for continuous evaluation, feedback, and revision, reflecting a commitment to ongoing learning and adjustment. This requires a new kind of political leadership, one that models epistemic humility, that is willing to admit when it does not have all the answers, and that can foster environments where diverse expertise is genuinely sought and integrated. Such leaders would prioritize the quality of the questions being asked over the expediency of prepackaged answers, guiding their constituents through complexity rather than offering simplistic assurances. Moreover, civic engagement must move beyond mere advocacy for predetermined positions towards collaborative problem-solving, empowering citizens to engage with the nuances of policy challenges and contribute to multifaceted solutions. A public discourse rooted in confident inquiry understands that the strength of a collective decision lies not in its initial certainty, but in its capacity for revision and its resilience in the face of unforeseen challenges. The implementation of these systemic changes is not a simple, linear process, but rather a complex, multi-generational endeavor. It demands sustained effort, iterative experimentation, and a profound shift in societal values. We acknowledge the deep-seated resistance such transformations will inevitably encounter, the psychological comfort of certainty, the inertia of established power structures, and the pervasive human inclination towards cognitive ease will present formidable obstacles. Furthermore, we must guard against the potential for misuse, where the call for, quote, 55, quote, might be weaponized to endlessly defer action or to sow unwarranted doubt where robust evidence exists. The objective is not paralysis by analysis, but informed action based on the best available, though always provisional understanding. Yet, the vision of a society that embraces confident inquiry is profoundly compelling. It is a society not devoid of conviction, but one where convictions are earned through rigorous examination, held with an open hand, and subject to continuous refinement. Such a society would be inherently more resilient, more adaptable, and infinitely more capable of addressing the complex, interconnected global challenges that confront us. It would foster innovation not through blind leaps of faith, but through systematic exploration and a willingness to challenge established paradigms. The quote 56 may never be fully lifted from the human psyche, for the allure of definitive answers is deeply ingrained, However, through intentional systemic reform, we can significantly loosen their hold, revealing a world of continuous discovery, shared learning, and a collective commitment to navigating the vast and beautiful expanse of the unknown. This commitment represents not an endpoint, but an enduring journey, a continuous dedication to growth, both individually and collectively, in pursuit of a more adaptive, resilient, and intellectually vibrant human future. The vision we articulate, a society predicated on confident inquiry, where epistemic humility forms the bedrock of individual and collective endeavour, is not merely an aspiration, it is a profound systemic recalibration, a reorientation of the very axes upon which human knowledge and interaction currently pivot. The preceding chapters have meticulously delineated the psychological underpinnings of confident ignorance and the individual practices necessary to cultivate a counter-paradigm. Yet, the transition from individual transformation to societal metamorphosis presents a formidable challenge, one compounded by the inertia of deeply entrenched systems and the pervasive psychological comfort derived from unexamined certainty. We confront not merely a set of cognitive biases within isolated minds, but a complex self-reinforcing ecosystem where these biases are amplified, rewarded, and institutionalized. Education, media, and politics, the very pillars designed to enlighten, inform, and govern, often inadvertently become conduits for the propagation of confident ignorance. To merely advocate for systemic reform without acknowledging the profound structural resistance and psychological inertia would be to underestimate the magnitude of the task at hand. This is not a matter of minor adjustments or superficial policy tweaks. It demands a fundamental rethinking of our collective relationship with knowledge, doubt, and truth. Consider the educational apparatus, ostensibly designed to cultivate critical thought and intellectual curiosity. In practice, many systems inadvertently foster an environment where the quote 57 is prioritized over the investigative process, where memorization eclipses conceptual understanding, and where uncertainty is often penalized rather than embraced as a fertile ground for deeper inquiry. The pressure to conform, to achieve standardized metrics, and to demonstrate mastery often dissuades students from exploring the liminal spaces of their own ignorance or from challenging established paradigms. We teach the results of scientific inquiry more often than the messy, iterative, and often uncertain process through which those results were painstakingly derived. The very structure of assessment, with its emphasis on definitive correctness, can instill a fear of error that inhibits the adventurous spirit of true inquiry. When the curriculum is framed as a canon of immutable facts, rather than a dynamic, evolving body of provisional understanding, we inadvertently nurture a disposition towards confident assertion rather than humble investigation. The consequence is a citizenry trained to seek answers, not necessarily to question the premises, nor to acknowledge the inherent provisionality of all knowledge. Similarly, the contemporary media landscape, driven by an attention economy and the imperative for instant gratification, often exacerbates the problem. Nuance and complexity are sacrificed at the altar of sensationalism and simplified narratives. The algorithms that govern our digital consumption, optimized for engagement, tend to create echo chambers, reinforcing existing beliefs and insulating individuals from dissonant perspectives. Confident, often ill-informed, assertions are amplified, not because of their veracity or intellectual rigor, but because of their capacity to provoke strong emotional responses and generate clicks. The deliberative process, which requires time, patience, and a willingness to engage with ambiguity, struggles to compete with the immediate decisive pronouncements that dominate public discourse. When the pursuit of truth is conflated with the generation of viral content, the incentive structure shifts dramatically, rewarding confident performance over careful contemplation. The media, in its current manifestation, often acts as a powerful feedback loop, validating and strengthening the very confident ignorance we seek to dismantle, transforming complex issues into simplistic binaries, and transforming nuanced debates into performative spectacles. Political discourse, perhaps the most visible arena for the interplay of confident ignorance and its consequences, further illustrates this systemic challenge. In an electoral cycle driven by the need for decisive leadership and clear policy platforms, politicians are often incentivized to project an image of unwavering certainty, even on matters of profound complexity and uncertainty. To admit doubt, to acknowledge the limits of one's knowledge, or to express a willingness to adapt policy in response to new evidence, can be perceived as weakness, indecision, or lack of conviction. The adversarial nature of partisan politics often transforms policy debates into ideological battles, where the goal is to win rather than to collaboratively seek optimal solutions. This environment actively discourages the very epistemic humility we advocate, replacing it with rhetorical bravado and the performative certainty that resonates with a public often seeking simple answers to complex problems. The result is policy making that can be rigid, resistant to evidence-based revision, and ultimately less effective, born from the crucible of confident assertion rather than collective, humble inquiry. Beyond these institutional resistances, there lies a deeper, collective psychological barrier. Even if individuals intellectually grasp the value of epistemic humility, the collective adoption of such a posture faces the formidable challenge of social conformity and groupthink. To stand as an individual acknowledging doubt in a collective that values certainty can be a socially perilous act. The fear of appearing weak, indecisive, or unintelligent in a competitive social environment often overrides the intellectual imperative to qualify one's knowledge. Leadership in particular faces a unique dilemma. How does one lead with humility, acknowledging the provisionality of plans and the necessity of adaptation, without eroding the confidence of followers who yearn for a steady hand and clear direction? The very notion of leadership is often intertwined with the projection of unwavering conviction, a trait that, while occasionally beneficial for mobilization, can become profoundly detrimental when it ossifies into confident ignorance. Thus, the quote 59 we speak of is not merely a metaphor, it is a recognition of the profound evolutionary shift required. It mandates a patient, persistent, and multi-pronged approach that transcends simple policy changes and delves into the very cultural fabric of our societies. This journey begins not with a grand revolution, but with 1,000 small, deliberate acts of defiance against the gravitational pull of certainty. One crucial aspect of this journey involves the cultivation of new cultural narratives. We must consciously work to shift societal values away from associating certainty with strength and towards equating rigorous inquiry, adaptive learning, and the courageous acknowledgement of ignorance with true intellectual and moral fortitude. This requires celebrating those who demonstrate epistemic humility, who publicly revise their positions in light of new evidence, and who prioritize collaborative problem-solving over individual triumph. It means actively challenging the media's glorification of the confidently ignorant and instead elevating voices that embody thoughtful skepticism and nuanced understanding. Furthermore, we must begin to construct new epistemic infrastructures, systems and processes explicitly designed to promote humility and inquiry. This could manifest in educational reforms that emphasize problem-based learning, Socratic methods, and metacognitive reflection, where students are taught how to think and how to question, rather than simply what to think. It might involve designing public forums and deliberative bodies that are structured to foster genuine dialogue, steel manning of opposing arguments, and a collective search for robust solutions rather than adversarial debate. In media, this could mean supporting platforms that prioritize depth, context, and diverse perspectives, incentivizing investigative journalism that unpacks complexity, and developing algorithmic systems that promote intellectual curiosity rather than mere engagement. In politics, it might entail institutionalizing mechanisms for adaptive policymaking, where policies are treated as hypotheses to be tested and revised, rather than immutable decrees, and where expert consensus is genuinely sought and integrated into decision-making processes. This evolutionary process will, undoubtedly, be fraught with challenges and setbacks. The forces of psychological comfort, ego, and the vested interests of existing power structures will resist these shifts at every turn. There will be moments of regression, periods where the allure of confident ignorance reasserts itself with renewed vigor. The journey will demand continuous vigilance, a persistent willingness to challenge our own assumptions, and an unwavering commitment to the ideals of open inquiry. It requires us to recognize that the destination is not a static utopia of perfect knowledge, but rather a dynamic, ongoing state of collective learning and adaptation, a society that is perpetually in the process of becoming more epistemically humble. Ultimately, the transformation we envision is not merely about accumulating more facts, but about fundamentally altering our relationship with the boundaries of knowledge itself. It is about fostering a collective disposition that views unanswered questions not as failures, but as invitations to further exploration, that perceives doubt not as a weakness, but as a catalyst for deeper understanding, and that understands the limits of individual knowledge as an imperative for collaborative wisdom. This recalibration of societal values, this commitment to a culture of continuous humble inquiry, represents the profound multi-generational endeavor that lies before us. It is a journey whose completion may never be fully realized, but whose pursuit is essential for the flourishing of human intelligence and the sustainable progress of our civilization. The path is long, the obstacles are numerous, but the imperative for this fundamental shift grows more urgent with each passing epoch of confident assertion and its attendant consequences. We must embark upon it with both resolute conviction in its necessity and profound humility regarding its difficulty. We stand at the precipice of a profound paradox. The very mechanisms that once facilitated our survival, the swift judgments, the tribal affiliations, the comfort of certainty, now impede our collective evolution. The unresolved mystery we previously identified is not a puzzle with a singular answer, but rather a Gordian knot woven from the threads of our deepest psychological needs, our most ingrained cognitive habits, and the robust structures of our societies. To navigate this resistance is to undertake an archaeological excavation into the human psyche, revealing the layers of comfort, ego, and power that buttress the fortress of confident ignorance. The allure of psychological comfort, we observe, is perhaps the most formidable barrier. In a world characterized by accelerating complexity and pervasive uncertainty, the mind instinctively seeks refuge in simplicity and conviction. Confident ignorance offers a potent antidote to existential anxiety, providing a stable cognitive framework within which to interpret the chaotic flux of reality. It grants us the solace of cognitive closure, the cessation of the often unpleasant mental effort required for sustained inquiry and the acceptance of ambiguity. This closure, in turn, reduces the dissonance that arises when our existing mental models are challenged, sparing us the arduous task of re-evaluating deeply held beliefs. The brain, ever efficient, readily embraces pathways that minimize energy expenditure, and few pathways are as energy efficient as the reinforcement of the familiar. Furthermore, this psychological comfort extends beyond individual cognitive ease to encompass a powerful sense of belonging. Our beliefs are not formed in a vacuum. They are often cultivated within social ecosystems, becoming markers of identity and affiliation. To question a shared belief is not merely an intellectual exercise. It can feel like a betrayal of one's group, a rupture in the fabric of social cohesion. The fear of ostracization, a primal human dread, looms large. We witness individuals clinging to demonstrably flawed assertions, not out of malice, but out of a profound need to maintain their social standing, to remain within the comforting embrace of their chosen intellectual community. The dopamine hit derived from, quote, 61 is amplified by the communal validation of that rightness, creating a powerful self-reinforcing feedback loop that prioritizes social harmony over epistemic accuracy. Our identities, we find, become inextricably linked to our convictions, transforming intellectual challenges into personal attacks, and making any concession feel like a diminishment of self. This brings us to the formidable role of the ego. The ego, in its tireless quest for self-preservation and affirmation, views the admission of ignorance or error as a direct threat. It constructs elaborate defenses, rationalizations, and counter-arguments, not necessarily to arrive at truth, but to maintain a consistent, favorable self-image. The effort required to genuinely acknowledge a lack of understanding, to confront one's own limitations, is immense. It demands a vulnerability that runs counter to the ego's foundational imperative to appear competent and authoritative. We observe the phenomenon of ego depletion, where the sustained mental effort of defending an untenable position eventually leads to fatigue, often resulting in a retreat to entrenched, comfortable ignorance rather than an embrace of challenging new information. The social currency of certainty, the respect accorded to those who speak with unwavering conviction, further inflates the ego's protective shell, rendering it impervious to the gentle probes of epistemic humility. The fear of appearing weak, indecisive, or unintelligent in the face of complex problems is a potent deterrent to the adoption of a beginner's mind. Beyond the individual psyche, the challenge intensifies as we confront the entrenched power structures that inadvertently, or sometimes deliberately, perpetuate confident ignorance. Political systems, for instance, often reward unwavering certainty over nuanced deliberation. Leaders who project an image of absolute conviction, who offer simplistic solutions to complex problems, frequently garner greater public support than those who acknowledge uncertainty and advocate for adaptive provisional policies. The political arena, in its current manifestation, often becomes a battleground of competing certainties, where the admission of doubt is perceived as a weakness to be exploited by rivals. This dynamic incentivizes politicians to speak with an air of infallible knowledge, even on subjects beyond their expertise, thereby modelling and reinforcing confident ignorance throughout the electorate. Similarly, media ecosystems, particularly in their contemporary algorithm-driven forms, often prioritize sensationalism, emotional resonance, and rapid dissemination over depth, context, and critical inquiry. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement tend to amplify content that evokes strong emotional responses, often at the expense of factual accuracy or nuanced understanding. Simplified narratives, bold declarations, and the rapid-fire exchange of unverified information become the norm, creating an environment where confident, easily digestible falsehoods can proliferate more effectively than complex evidence-based truths. The economic incentives of clicks and views often align with the perpetuation of confident ignorance. As certainty sells, while ambiguity and intellectual humility demand greater cognitive investment from the audience. Even within certain educational and corporate structures, we occasionally discern subtle forces that inadvertently reinforce this pattern. Educational systems, focused on standardized testing and the transmission of established facts, can sometimes inadvertently de-emphasize the process of critical inquiry, the cultivation of metacognition, and the comfort with intellectual discomfort. Corporate cultures that prioritize decisive action and quantifiable outcomes can sometimes inadvertently discourage the open questioning of assumptions, the exploration of alternative perspectives, or the admission of uncertainty, especially at leadership levels. The reward systems, implicit and explicit across various societal institutions, often favor the confident assertion of what is known, rather than the humble exploration of what remains unknown. Navigating this labyrinth of resistance demands a multi-generational approach, not merely a series of tactical adjustments, but a fundamental reframing of humanity's relationship with knowledge itself. The quote 63 is not about finding a single lever to pull, but about initiating a sustained, collective re-education, a societal metacognition that questions the very foundations of our cognitive and social habits. This journey necessitates a deliberate and continuous effort to dismantle the psychological comfort of certainty, to humble the ego's defensive posturing, and to redesign the institutional structures that currently benefit from and perpetuate confident ignorance. The foundational shift begins with a re-evaluation of the value we ascribe to knowledge. We must move from viewing knowledge as a static possession, a collection of facts to be acquired and defended, to understanding it as a dynamic process of continuous inquiry, adaptation, and iterative refinement. In this new paradigm, knowing is not an endpoint but a waypoint, a temporary consolidation of understanding subject to perpetual revision. This shift requires us to elevate the process of learning, the how and why of our understanding, above the mere accumulation of information. It means valuing the question more than the definitive answer, the journey of discovery more than the destination of certainty. Concomitantly, we must work towards shifting the locus of authority, away from charismatic figures who project unwavering certainty, and towards a collective evidence-based inquiry. This entails fostering environments where expertise is respected for its depth and rigorous methodology, but never uncritically accepted, and where the collective intelligence of diverse perspectives is harnessed to address complex problems. It is a transition from an authority derived from confident assertion to an authority earned through diligent investigation, transparent reasoning, and a demonstrated willingness to revise understanding in the face of new evidence. Cultivating a societal metacognition is paramount. This involves developing the collective capacity to reflect on how we know, what biases influence our understanding, and what values underpin our pursuit of knowledge. It means designing public discourse, educational curricula, and media engagement platforms that explicitly encourage critical self-reflection, the identification of cognitive biases, and the open articulation of epistemic limitations. Such a society would not shy away from discussing its own cognitive vulnerabilities, but would embrace them as essential starting points for deeper, more robust understanding. In practice, this fundamental alteration would manifest as a society steeped in intellectual humility, not as an individual virtue alone, but as a collective societal ethos. Imagine public forums where leaders articulate policy proposals with explicit acknowledgements of their inherent uncertainties, detailing the assumptions made and the potential areas of unforeseen consequence. Consider educational systems where assessments prioritize the student's ability to articulate the limits of their knowledge, to formulate insightful questions, and to engage in constructive dialogue with opposing viewpoints, rather than simply reproducing facts. Envision media platforms that dedicate significant resources to exploring the nuances of complex issues, presenting multiple perspectives, and actively correcting misinformation with transparent explanations of how errors were made and why new information superseded previous understandings. This dynamic state of collective learning, adaptation, and boundless inquiry would transform our very approach to global challenges. Interdisciplinary collaboration would become the default, with experts from disparate fields uniting not to defend their own disciplinary fortresses, but to collectively map the boundaries of ignorance and forge novel solutions. Open science, characterized by transparent methodologies, shared data, and collaborative peer review, would accelerate discovery. Public engagement with complex scientific and societal issues would evolve from passive consumption of information to active participation in the co-creation of knowledge, fostering a deeper sense of collective ownership and responsibility. Dialogue would shift from adversarial debate aimed at winning an argument to collaborative exploration aimed at collectively expanding the frontiers of understanding. The journey demands continuous vigilance and intentional design. It is not an automatic progression, but a conscious, sustained commitment to re-engineer the psychological, social, and institutional scaffolding of our knowledge acquisition. We must actively design educational systems that cultivate critical thinking, metacognition, and a comfort with uncertainty from an early age. We must innovate media structures that reward depth, context, and diverse perspectives, fostering curiosity and critical media literacy, and we must reimagine political discourse to cultivate deliberative democracy, adaptive policy making, and leadership that models epistemic humility, valuing inquiry over unwavering certainty. This is a perpetual state of becoming, a continuous striving towards a more enlightened relationship with knowledge, a relationship that recognizes the inherent provisionality of all understanding and embraces the infinite potential of collective inquiry. The unresolved mystery is not about finding a magic bullet, but about committing ourselves to the arduous, continuous work of dismantling and rebuilding our relationship with knowledge, recognizing that our very survival and flourishing depend upon it. The blueprint for a more epistemically humble society, while outlined in broad strokes, demands a deeper examination of its practical implementation and the profound shifts it necessitates across our most foundational institutions. The transition from an environment that inadvertently fosters confident ignorance to one that actively cultivates epistemic humility is not a singular policy change, but a fundamental cultural recalibration, a multi-generational endeavor that touches the very core of how we perceive, process, and transmit knowledge. We must now explore the intricate mechanisms of this recalibration, acknowledging both the immense difficulty and the ultimate necessity of such a transformation. At the heart of this cultural shift lies a re-evaluation of knowledge itself, moving from a static commodity to a dynamic provisional process. This reconception begins with our educational systems. Our current paradigms, often remnants of industrial-era imperatives, frequently prioritize the absorption and regurgitation of facts over the cultivation of critical inquiry and an embrace of uncertainty. We teach what to know, but rarely how to know, or how to doubt what we think we know. A truly recalibrated educational system would thus shift its locus from the transmission of established knowledge to the navigation of epistemic landscapes. This entails fostering metacognition from an early age, teaching students not merely to think, but to think about their thinking. It involves explicit instruction in cognitive biases, demonstrating how our minds are prone to shortcuts and distortions, thereby equipping individuals with the tools to recognize and mitigate these tendencies in themselves and others. Pedagogical methods would emphasize inquiry-based learning, where questions are valued as much as, if not more than, answers. We would encourage productive struggle, reframing errors not as failures but as crucial data points in the learning process. Collaborative problem solving, which naturally exposes individuals to diverse perspectives and the limitations of their own understanding, would become central. The goal is to cultivate comfort with ambiguity, to instill an appreciation for the complexity of most issues, and to teach the intellectual humility required to revise one's understanding in the face of new evidence. This includes deconstructing familiar concepts, asking the, quote, 69 cascade not just once but multiple times to reveal underlying assumptions and unexamined premises. It is about learning to distinguish between genuine expertise and mere confident assertion, developing the discernment necessary to evaluate sources and methodologies rather than simply accepting conclusions. Education, in this reimagined form, becomes less about filling a vessel and more about igniting a critical, self-aware flame that seeks understanding through continuous, humble inquiry. Beyond formal education, the media and information ecosystem stands as another critical pillar requiring profound re-engineering. The contemporary media landscape, driven by algorithms optimized for engagement rather than enlightenment, often amplifies sensational certainty and reinforces existing echo chambers, making the cultivation of epistemic humility exceptionally challenging. To counteract this, we must foster societal, quote, 70 quote regarding information consumption. This involves developing robust media literacy programs that extend beyond mere fact-checking to encompass an understanding of journalistic processes, editorial biases, and the psychological mechanisms exploited by misinformation. We need to empower individuals to critically assess not just the content of information, but also its source, its context, and the motivations behind its dissemination. Furthermore, the design of information platforms themselves must be re-evaluated. We envision systems that reward nuance, deliberation, and the presentation of diverse, well-reasoned perspectives, rather than merely prioritizing virality or emotional resonance. This could involve algorithmic shifts that favor depth over superficiality, that expose users to counter-arguments and different viewpoints, and that provide tools for contextualizing information. Public discourse must be recalibrated away from adversarial posturing towards constructive dialogue, creating spaces where, quote, 71, opposing arguments is seen as an intellectual virtue, not a concession. This reimagining of media is not about censorship, but about cultivating an information environment that supports, rather than undermines, our collective capacity for reasoned judgment and a shared pursuit of understanding. It is about building an infrastructure for epistemic resilience, where the default is critical engagement rather than passive absorption. Finally, the political and civic sphere, perhaps the most visible battleground for confident ignorance, requires a radical reimagining of leadership and deliberation. Political discourse, currently incentivizing unwavering conviction and penalizing doubt, must evolve to embrace adaptive, humble leadership. Leaders, in this new paradigm, would model epistemic humility, acknowledging the provisional nature of policy solutions, the complexity of societal challenges, and the necessity of learning and revising based on evidence and collective input. This would shift the locus of authority from charismatic certainty to collective, evidence-based exploration. The concept of deliberative democracy offers a promising pathway. This involves designing political processes that facilitate structured, reasoned dialogue among diverse citizens, where participants are encouraged to listen, understand, and weigh different perspectives before forming conclusions. Such processes emphasize mutual respect, empathy, and a collective commitment to finding common ground, or at least understanding the irreducible differences. Policy in this context would be seen not as an immutable decree, but as a hypothesis to be tested, evaluated, and adjusted. Adaptive governance, where policies are continuously monitored, assessed for their efficacy, and revised based on new data and evolving circumstances, would replace rigid ideological pronouncements. This requires a fundamental shift in the culture of governance, moving from a winner-take-all mentality to one of collective problem-solving, where compromise is not a weakness, but a strategic necessity in navigating complex realities. It implies fostering a civic metacognition, where citizens and leaders alike are aware of their own biases and the limitations of their knowledge, actively seeking out and valuing dissenting opinions as essential for robust decision-making. These three areas, education, media, and politics, are not discrete interventions, but rather interdependent threads within the tapestry of a coherent societal evolution. Reforms in one area will inevitably influence the others, creating a virtuous cycle where increased epistemic humility in education fosters more discerning media consumption, which in turn demands more humble and deliberative political leadership. The synergy is crucial. An epistemically humble society is not merely a collection of epistemically humble individuals, but a dynamic system where institutions and cultural norms actively reinforce and reward the practices of open inquiry, critical thinking, and intellectual modesty. The magnitude of this undertaking cannot be overstated. It is a multi-generational project, requiring sustained effort, a willingness to challenge deeply entrenched habits, and a fundamental shift in societal values. The psychological comfort derived from confident certainty, the egoic satisfaction of being, quote, 72, quote, the social pressures of conformity, and the systemic inertia of established institutions all present formidable resistance. The, quote, 73 is not a singular puzzle, but the complex multi-generational challenge of overcoming this interplay of psychological needs, ingrained cognitive habits, and systemic inertia. Yet, the stakes are equally profound. Our ability to navigate the increasingly complex global challenges of the 21st century, from climate change and pandemics to technological disruption and social fragmentation, hinges on our collective capacity for adaptability, learning, and collaboration. A society mired in confident ignorance, where expertise is dismissed and consensus is elusive, risks stagnation, polarization, and ultimately self-destruction. Conversely, a society committed to continuous learning, recognizing the provisional nature of all understanding and embracing the infinite potential of collective inquiry, holds the promise of unprecedented resilience, innovation, and human flourishing. The journey towards epistemic humility is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is an existential imperative, a recommitment to the very ideals of progress and enlightenment that define our better angels. The existential imperative, as we have posited, demands more than individual introspection. It necessitates a profound, systemic recalibration of the very structures that shape human cognition and societal interaction. The journey from acknowledging confident ignorance to cultivating a pervasive epistemic humility is not merely arduous, it is multi-generational, requiring a sustained collective will to dismantle deeply entrenched cognitive habits and institutional reward systems. We now turn our attention to the foundational pillars of this societal transformation: the redesign of education, the re-engineering of the media ecosystem, and the reimagining of political and civic discourse. These are not discrete endeavors, but interconnected facets of a singular, overarching project aimed at fostering a culture of inquiry, adaptability, and genuine understanding. Education stands as the primary crucible for shaping the human mind, and it is here that the seeds of epistemic humility must first be sown. Historically, many educational paradigms have inadvertently reinforced confident ignorance by prioritizing rote memorization, emphasizing the attainment of, quote, 74 answers, and often penalizing uncertainty or the questioning of established doctrines. This approach, while efficient for transmitting a fixed body of knowledge, inadvertently trains individuals to equate knowledge with certainty and to view doubt as a weakness rather than an intellectual strength. It instills a performative confidence, where the mastery of facts is mistaken for a deeper understanding of underlying principles or the limitations of those facts. Our proposed redesign of education is predicated on two fundamental shifts: the prioritization of metacognition and the pervasive adoption of inquiry-based learning. Metacognition, the capacity to, quote 75, becomes the cornerstone of this new pedagogical philosophy. We contend that individuals must be explicitly taught to recognize their own cognitive processes, to identify the biases that color their perceptions, and to understand the mechanisms by which knowledge is constructed and validated. This involves regular self-reflection on one's learning journey, an awareness of one's own intellectual strengths and weaknesses, and a conscious effort to challenge assumptions. For instance, a curriculum infused with metacognition would encourage students not only to arrive at an answer, but to articulate how they arrived at it, to consider alternative approaches, and to reflect on the potential flaws in their reasoning. This cultivates an internal monitor, a constant gentle skepticism directed not outward at others, but inward at one's own cognitive machinery. Complementing metacognition is the widespread implementation of inquiry-based learning. This approach moves beyond the passive reception of information to actively engaging students in the process of discovery. It frames learning as an ongoing investigation, where questions are often more valuable than immediate answers, and where the iterative process of hypothesizing, experimenting, and revising is celebrated. Imagine classrooms where the why, cascade, previously discussed as an individual strategy, becomes a collective practice, deconstructing concepts to their foundational elements. Students are encouraged to explore ambiguities, to confront complex problems without immediate solutions, and to appreciate the provisional nature of much knowledge. This fosters a beginner's mind from an early age, cultivating comfort with uncertainty and a genuine curiosity that transcends the need for immediate closure. Educators, in this model, transform from mere disseminators of facts into facilitators of inquiry, modeling intellectual humility by admitting their own limits, encouraging diverse perspectives, and valuing the journey of exploration over the destination of definitive answers. Such a system, over generations, promises to produce individuals who are not only knowledgeable, but also intellectually agile, resilient in the face of complexity, and intrinsically motivated to learn and adapt. Parallel to the transformation of education is the critical task of re-engineering the media ecosystem, a landscape that currently often acts as a potent amplifier of confident ignorance. In its current configuration, driven by engagement metrics, algorithmic amplification, and the relentless pursuit of attention, the media frequently incentivizes simplistic narratives, sensationalism, and the reinforcement of existing beliefs. Social media platforms, in particular, create echo chambers where individuals are primarily exposed to information that confirms their existing worldviews, insulating them from cognitive dissonance and fostering an illusion of consensus within their chosen tribes. Nuance is often sacrificed for sound bites, and the speed of information dissemination frequently outweighs the rigor of verification, leading to a pervasive environment where certainty however unfounded, triumphs over measured consideration. To counter this, we advocate for a multi-pronged approach to re-engineering the media ecosystem. Foremost is the widespread cultivation of critical media literacy. This involves equipping individuals with the tools to deconstruct media messages, to identify overt and subtle biases, to evaluate the credibility of sources, and to understand the underlying economic and algorithmic forces that shape the information they consume. It entails teaching the public to discern between fact and opinion, between evidence and anecdote, and between genuine expertise and confident pronouncements. This critical faculty allows individuals to navigate the deluge of information with a discerning eye, rather than passively absorbing narratives that confirm their biases. Furthermore, there is an imperative to foster platforms and practices that genuinely promote diverse perspectives, moving beyond the mere aggregation of partisan viewpoints. This means designing systems that actively expose individuals to well-reasoned counter-arguments that prioritize depth and context over superficiality, and that reward intellectual curiosity and open-minded engagement. It might involve technological innovations that challenge algorithmic echo chambers, perhaps by curating diverse, high-quality sources, or by incentivizing constructive dialogue across ideological divides. The goal is to create an informational environment where the pursuit of understanding is valued above the validation of existing beliefs, and where the complexity of societal challenges is acknowledged rather than reduced to simplistic, easily digestible narratives. This re-engineering demands a collaborative effort from media organizations, technology companies, educators, and policymakers to prioritize civic health over engagement metrics, fostering a public discourse grounded in evidence and mutual understanding. Finally, the reimagining of political and civic discourse stands as perhaps the most challenging, yet ultimately crucial pillar of this transformation. In many contemporary societies, political discourse has become a battleground for confident ignorance, characterized by dogmatism, tribalism, and an unwavering commitment to ideological positions regardless of evidence. Charismatic figures often leverage certainty as a form of strength, portraying any admission of doubt or willingness to compromise as weakness. The political arena frequently rewards the articulation of simple, definitive solutions to complex problems, while penalizing nuanced analysis or the acknowledgement of trade-offs. This environment stifles genuine deliberation, exacerbates polarization, and undermines the capacity for collective problem-solving. Our vision for reimagining political and civic discourse centers on the principles of deliberative democracy and adaptive leadership. Deliberative democracy shifts the focus from adversarial debate, where the goal is to win an argument, to structured, inclusive processes designed to foster reasoned discussion, mutual understanding, and the pursuit of common ground. This involves creating spaces, both physical and digital, where citizens and their representatives can engage with complex issues, weigh diverse evidence, listen respectfully to differing viewpoints, and collectively construct solutions. It requires a commitment to transparency, to the presentation of accurate information, and to processes that actively encourage participants to consider the perspectives of those with whom they disagree. The success of deliberative democracy hinges on the cultivation of intellectual humility among all participants, recognizing the limits of individual knowledge and the value of collective wisdom. Complementing this is the imperative for adaptive leadership. We envision leaders who model intellectual humility, who possess the courage to admit error, to adapt policies in response to new information, and to prioritize long-term societal well-being over short-term political expediency. These are leaders who understand that true strength lies not in an unwavering adherence to a fixed ideology, but in the capacity to learn, to evolve, and to guide their communities through uncertainty. They would value expertise while critically assessing its limitations and foster environments where constructive dissent is encouraged rather than suppressed. This redefines the very notion of strong leadership, moving away from the archetypal confident figure who always has the answers, towards one who embraces complexity, facilitates collective intelligence, and navigates challenges with a blend of conviction and profound humility. These three pillars, education, media, and political discourse, are inextricably linked. A more epistemically humble citizenry, nurtured by a reformed educational system, will demand a more nuanced and responsible media landscape. A media ecosystem that values depth and diverse perspectives will, in turn, inform a more deliberative and adaptive political process. And political leaders who model humility and foster inclusive dialogue will inspire a more engaged and critically thinking populace. The challenges to implementing such sweeping changes are immense. They will encounter resistance from vested interests who benefit from the current systems, from the deep-seated cognitive inertia of individuals, and from the sheer difficulty of re-engineering deeply entrenched societal habits. The psychological comfort derived from confident ignorance, coupled with the systemic rewards for certainty, presents a formidable barrier. Yet this multi-generational project is not merely aspirational, it is an existential imperative. In an era defined by accelerating technological change, complex global crises such as climate change and pandemics, and increasingly interconnected societies, humanity's collective capacity for resilience, innovation, and flourishing hinges on its ability to learn, adapt, and self-correct. Without a fundamental shift towards epistemic humility, we risk paralysis in the face of complexity, catastrophic misjudgment driven by unexamined certainty, and a perpetuation of the very divisions that prevent us from addressing our most pressing challenges. The vision of an epistemically humble society is one less prone to polarization, more capable of collaborative problem-solving, and perpetually engaged in the rigorous yet rewarding pursuit of genuine understanding. It is a journey that begins with a single step, but one that demands an unwavering commitment across generations.